Monique Chemillier-Gendreau.
Mr. President, members of the Court, it is an honor for me to appear before you on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. However, this honor is mixed with the oppressive feeling that none of us here can set aside our humanity, because that which we are to discuss in relation to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is, to use the expression of the representative of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and I quote, a vicious cycle of blood, pain, and death, end quote. Thus, throughout this presentation, I will remain closely in thought with the victims of the 7th of October 2023 massacres, as well as with the incommensurately more numerous victims that are the Palestinians of the West Bank, of Jerusalem, and far more still of Gaza. They are the victims and martyrs of a vengeful war. The question put to you by the United Nations General Assembly will bring me first to draw up the tally of Israel's breaches of international law. I will then show how examination of these breaches highlights questions of legal standard and legal norms. That is to say, how compliance with obligations by some lead to rights for others. The two go hand in hand. Yet, by infringing upon its obligations, Israel is impairing the rights of a people to the point that it is programming the death of that people. The whole system of the United Nations relies on actors keeping their word, pacta sunt servanda. These few words, stated in the Convention on the Law of Treaties, are the fragile foundation of this whole edifice. And relying on the honor of states for them to fulfill their commitments, the world has equipped itself with a very elaborate corpus of rules of law. Yet, the situation about which your opinion is requested, to use the expression used here by other participants, is a deluge of breaches by Israel of its international commitments. This is how the illegal measures through which the Knesset has decided to close UNRWA's offices are merely the end point of a long series of previous breaches. In and of themselves, they pave the way for further, even more serious breaches. Let us now specify these three phases in Israel's infringements of international law. The first phase started with the creation of Israel. In claiming the right to undertake the measures under consideration here, Israel is infringing upon its original commitments. As a candidate state to the United Nations in 1949 already, Israel was already suspected of lacking sincerity in its international commitments. That is why the General Assembly demanded that this state, before its accession, provide the guarantee that it would abide by the Charter and all the obligations flowing from it. But the assurances provided by the representative of Israel in order for his state to accede to the organization soon proved to be fallacious. The conquest by force of a significant part of the Palestinian territory in 1949, the renewed occupation, once again by force, of the entirety of that territory in 1967, the proclamation of Jerusalem as capital of the Israeli state, the denial of the right of return for Palestinians chased from their homes, the accelerated settlement of the entire Palestinian territory, these are all expressions of disregard for all the provisions of international law. And since 1967, Israel's obstination to refuse the application of the rights of self-determination of peoples to the benefit of the Palestinian people, its indifference to all rules of humanitarian law in cases of armed conflicts and to all human rights norms, all these form a fertile ground for repeated infringements of shared norms. The latest poisonous manifestation of these will be the object of our scrutiny here. The second phase of Israel's breaches of international law is constituted by the measures taken vis-à-vis United Nations organs on the basis of an already illegal occupation. The laws voted by the Knesset on the 28th of October 2024 to put an end to UNRWA activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, and the decision that those laws should come into force as early as the 28th of January 2025 are unlawful. The same goes for the unilateral termination on the 3rd of November 2024 of the exchange of letters signed in Jerusalem on the 14th of June 1967 between Israel and UNRWA. All these decisions are indeed violations to Articles 2, Paragraph 5 and 105 of the Charter of the United Nations, which oblige Israel to assist the organization in all its actions and to grant its agents all the privileges and immunities required for the accomplishment of their functions. And to the contrary of what has been purported here by some delegations, Article 2, Paragraph 5 of the Charter cannot be interpreted restrictively, and the assistance of states is required for all actions of all organs of the United Nations and as a consequence of UNRWA. Measures taken by Israel against that organ are also a breach of the provisions of the 1946 Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. In withdrawing the specific agreement made with UNRWA in 1967, Israel is in breach of its obligation to begin prior negotiations before calling any agreement into question. And at the same time, this termination of a bilateral agreement has no effect in substance because Israel remains bound by the 1946 Convention to which it is a state party. The documents established by the United Nations, referred to here by several participants, have highlighted how Israel has set itself against UNRWA personnel. Many have been killed, some thrown into mass graves, others tortured while detained. The convoys carrying relief personnel and supplies have been impeded. Vital missions were targeted. Goods and supplies were damaged. Those that were imported were illegally taxed. Healthcare and education centers have been attacked. UNRWA staff or personnel has been threatened with criminal prosecution. All of this is on file, and I will not go into the detail of it. Each of these actions is an infringement of the obligations brought about under the 1946 Convention. That convention obliges signatory states to protect the personnel of the United Nations and to grant it the privileges and immunities necessary to their function, and in particular to their free movement, to grant them immunity from every form of legal process, to protect their premises and archives, and to exempt them from taxes. In an opinion dating back to 1962, you have recalled how the way in which subsidiary organs are used depend on the consent of the concerned state. And Israel, in the written statements it has presented, declares itself to be the host country of UNRWA and claims for this reason to be able to withdraw its consent to the continued presence of that agency in Jerusalem. That is an abuse of the text. There is only one country that is host of UNRWA. It is Palestine, recognized as a state by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Israel has no title neither to host in or ban from the Palestinian territory any organ of the United Nations because Israel's presence there is illegal according to the conclusions of your 2024 opinion. This occupation is illegal throughout the entire occupied Palestinian territory. Thus, in the West Bank, sovereignty is not in abeyance, as you recalled earlier, as Israel claims. The matter is clearly settled. Sovereignty there belongs to the Palestinian people. It is therefore not for UNRWA to depart, and especially not from Jerusalem, where Israel has no valid title under international law. It is instead Israel which should cease to illegally occupy those places.
The third stage of Israel's breach of its international obligations is to be found in the consequences of the illegal measures adopted against UN bodies. The measures in and of themselves illegal produce a cascade of unlawful effects. Indeed, again, according to your your advisory opinion in 2024, Israel, which is the illegal occupying force of the Palestinian territory, is not released from its duties as occupying power. Bound by the Fourth Geneva Convention of August 12, 1949, and the Protocols of 1977, Israel is obliged to protect the Palestinian people, to put the wounded and the civilians out of harm's way, to protect hospitals and hospital staff and convoys transporting the wounded and the sick, to ensure the health care and education of the children, to ensure that the population is supplied in food and medicine. And when the population of an occupied territory is insufficiently supplied, to accept the relief efforts offered to the benefit of this population. We have cited the sources of these obligations in our written statement. I shall not repeat them here. Israel is in breach of all of these obligations. Now I would like to address what is at stake with the measures that are being challenged. The violations by Israel of its obligations in the occupied Palestinian territory have tragic consequences. The presence of UNRWA and the activities of the agency in the service of Palestinian refugees that are the overwhelming majority of the population of Gaza, had made it possible up until now, to avoid this population being decimated. What we are now seeing is with the prohibition imposed on UNRWA to carry on with its missions is the consequences of the transgressions that the illegal occupant is inflicting on the rights of Palestinians. Proclaimed rights are always abstract. They only become concrete in the relations between subjects of law. And with the massive breaches of all its obligations by Israel comes the denial of rights, in fact, of all the rights of the Palestinians. And this High Court expressed its concern in this regard with the 3 orders issued indicating interim measures in South Africa against Israel for the non-compliance with the Convention on the Prevention and the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The court alerted to the plight of the people of Gaza who are being starved, killed in vast numbers, deprived of the basic minimum needed to survive. On June 26, 2024, you ordered Israel to take immediate measures in order to ensure basic services. On March 28, 2024, in light of the confirmed starvation in Gaza, you ordered emergency measures to supply basic goods in close cooperation with the UN. And on May 24, 2024, you demanded that an end be put to the military offensive as it creates for the Palestinians in Gaza living conditions such that they could result in its physical destruction in whole or in part. We see what the response of Israel has been to your orders. There will be no end to the suffering of the Palestinian people because the body of the United Nations that was attempting, in conditions close to hell, to remedy the shortages caused by and the abuses perpetrated by the occupying power is no longer able to carry on. What we have today then is an illegal occupation by Israel that deprives the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, of all of their rights. The rights that are recognized either collectively or individually as being rights for all human beings. The right that is completely fading out of view for the Palestinian people is the political right of self-determination. This lofty right is the right that allows a people to accomplish its destiny freely and now has been made impossible in every way. How can we speak of territorial integrity for a people when another state is occupying all points of its territory? What is left of national unity for Palestinians who are banned from assembly or coming together as a group? What meaning does the expression economic, social, and cultural development have, the very foundation of the right to self-determination for families that are dying under the bombs and whose starving survivors have neither drinking water, food, or care? And how can we speak without making a mockery of it, talk of sovereignty over natural resources in Gaza when it is being reduced to rubble? Thus, deprived of their political right, the right that it sits at the top of all rights, the Palestinians have seen all of their ordinary human rights gradually disappear. Gone is the right to freedom of movement, the right to work, the right to educate one's children, to health. Gone is the right to life. What was left was the solidarity shown by other humans, those of the international organizations, primarily UNRWA, and all those NGOs that work motivated by a feeling of humanity. The right to be aided, to get relief, the ultimate right, the last step before the final fall for those who are in dire distress. This right has been wiped out by Israel's decision to prohibit UNRWA's activities and to render impossible the intervention of other organizations. These are the facts upon which this court is called to render an advisory opinion, and this opinion will be compelling. The court can only conclude that in application of Geneva Conventions, it is incumbent on the occupying power to act in the interest of the population of the occupied territory. If it fails to do so, then it is Article 59, the Fourth Geneva Convention, that imposes this. It must accept and facilitate relief operations. Nor can it impede the work of agencies that are ensuring the protection and the survival of this population. It will be up to you to forcefully assert the ultimate right that is the right to relief, to identify this right and to characterize it. You will recognize that this right belongs to those rights that are jus cogens, because it is the key that opens the way to all the rights in this same category. And the state of Israel will have to give in, understanding that defending this right is the universal guarantee that is indispensable for all. None of us can know for sure that we will never have to face barbarism ourselves, and that we might be in desperate need of help from those whose avowed mission is to provide relief. You will be called upon to examine Israel's argument, claiming the so-called absence of neutrality by UNRWA, a justification of the measures adopted by the Knesset against this UN body. You will find that the UN, alerted by Israel's accusations against certain staff members of UNRWA, commissioned an independent commission of inquiry to look into this. The report that was produced concluded that UNRWA had adopted an approach to neutrality that was more developed than that of other similar entities within the UN family or NGOs, making it possible to conclude that there was no credible grounds for Israel's allegations. So we are left with an unlawful act that has critical consequences for the 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. But the original unlawful act is the denial of the right of self-determination. It is the act of colonial domination. This is what fuels those who would claim to build their destiny by depriving others of their freedom. The French writer Albert Camus, in his autobiographical novel called The First Man, describes the unspeakable crimes that were committed during the colonial war waged by France in Algeria. And he has his father say, his father, who was a simple, uneducated man, who had witnessed the worst abuses, and he puts it in very simple terms, and I quote him, "A man knows what he should not do." But those who do not want to renounce domination lose all humanity, paving the way to the worst crimes. Probably, here we should confine ourselves to the question as posed by the General Assembly, specifically, what are Israel's obligations with regard to the presence and the activities of international organizations and other states on the occupied Palestinian territory. But these proceedings will have been for you an occasion to observe how Israel, through the acts under consideration here, are intentionally inflicting upon the group that is formed by the Palestinians to conditions of life that are calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. We see, thus, Israel moving from an increased risk of genocide, as you had rightly warned against in your last order, to the reality of genocide, the constituent elements of which have been outlined here today. I would finish by simply referring you to the submissions of the Cooperation of Islamic Cooperation, and by asking you to demand of Israel full reparation for all the unlawful acts committed, and to add that it is incumbent upon the Assembly General of the UN and all member states to take the strongest possible measures to put an end to the untenable situation created for the Palestinian people. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank the representatives of the organization.